talking to Kim Adams, who is an end-of-life guide and coach. And you can see from my big smile, this is not a serious, depressing subject. Kim brings tremendous joy to her work and to life in general. So I couldn't be happier to be talking with her today. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Jan. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, one thing that fascinates me about your work is how in the world, in terms of coaching, did you choose such a specialization?
That's a great question, and one that I get very frequently. You know, in some ways, it really feels like this work chose me, and it chose me from a really, really young age. I always had a sense of a lack of fear around death and dying and end of life, grief and loss. As such a little child, and kind of, I think in some ways, family and friends when I was really young, they were in a protective mode, as I think a lot of times parents are with small children around that subject. So not really allowed to go to wakes or funerals, or it really was a controlled environment. And I just felt like, there's something just not natural about that. Because in my mind, death and dying was natural. I was very connected to the natural world, just watch the life cycles of just even taking like a tree, for example, that the leaves fall off and the tree becomes barren. And then in the springtime, the buds form and either flowers come or more leaves or whatever. So I just always kind of kept that in the back of my mind because I didn't really have anyone to talk to about. But as I continued to get older, and I probably had, by the time I was 20, I don't know, 10, 15 deaths in my family and friends. And so I began to really just get more and more comfortable and started to speak out a little bit more about just kind of obviously acknowledging the grief, the sadness, the loss of us left here behind, but also realizing that, my sense of that we're much more than just these physical bodies, and now having language for that now that I was an adult. And so, just really exploring that. But I think what really kind of triggered like this as kind of a work piece for me, for lack of a better word, or a career, was the death of my grandmother back in 1996. All those years of all those deaths, I wasn't even aware of what grief was, so to speak. And so I kind of never had an expression for it. So these beautiful physical bodies we have kind of just took it on, just pressed it down and down and down. Well, the death of my grandmother really caused that explosion because there was no suppressing that. She and I were extremely close. And in some ways, it spilled over, and there was no way to contain that. And I thought, whoa, what is going on here? So I actually connected with a therapist who had become a coach to work through this. And she said, this is grief. This is from loss and death and probably all those accumulated ones. And so work through that. And, obviously, as we know, you need to move through grief. And so being able to come out on the other side, I thought, wow, here's an opportunity now to really support others moving through that. I've just had the experience, someone supported me through that. And so just exploring that more, and went to a life coaching program, and then said, what, now with the skill set and tools, let me merge the two together. And it's kind of how I've come to this point.
That's fantastic. There's so many things about that I would love to just dig into. But the one thing that strikes me is, as you were learning about death with the natural world, the component that was missing with the natural world is that grief, isn't it?
Yes, that was a big piece. Yeah. And nobody was speaking about it. And, we learned things along the way, and I learned that, this is not something we talked about. That was the message I got. I like to say the unintentional message, but that was the message. But yeah, grief is left out of a lot.
Is there a conventional, in terms of that unintentional message, is there an unintentional thought, or maybe that's it, that you would like to have an overall impact of changing?
Yes, I think specifically in terms of grief, it's that, we never really get over grief. We learn to kind of integrate our life in a new way now with the grief. And I think a lot of times people feel like if I get over something, if I get over grief or it's gone, and that would also equate to my loved one is now gone in the sense of memories and all that stuff. So really encouraging people to say, you know what, you can move through grief and the process and really come out on the other side, and with your new life and celebrating whatever's next, and still keeping the memory of your loved one and still kind of keeping that legacy. So I think a lot of people think it's an either or. Either I'm stuck in this and I just have to grieve forever, because if I don't, then I'll forget about my loved one or my loved one will be forgotten. But I'm inviting people to say, no, there's an and, because you can't move forward if you're stuck.
Right.
And at the same time, you can bring along the memories, the legacy, all the stuff that's in your heart of your loved one forward with you. So yeah, that's a huge piece.
It seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like 20 deaths in the time that you were young is a disproportionate number. Do you think that's true, that you had a lot of deaths in that short period of time of your life?
I think so. I mean, one of the pieces was I come from a large extended family. So, a lot of aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles. Yeah. Between my mom and my dad, there are 11 siblings right there. So then you multiply that out by their siblings. So
statistically, yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes a difference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely.
So life was giving you those lessons.
Life was absolutely giving me those lessons. Yes. And I guess looking back, some of them kind of really stuck, and some others I've learned when I got older.
Don't we all? Or maybe we don't.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's true.
Did you see your family respond to you differently as you chose to approach death and grief in a different way than they were?
I did, in a couple of ways. It's a great question. Some of them were like, "Ooh, okay, yeah, there's always been a little something. We're not surprised you're kind of going off the little beaten path here." And then others, in some ways, saw it as, "Oh, I could be a teacher or a mentor to them." Or when there was a death, it was like, "Oh, call Kim." Or when someone was ill, "Oh, we need to call Kim," or "She can come with us to the hospital because she's kind of strong and knows this work and she can support us." So I think it was a little bit of both, almost a relief, like, "Oh, there's someone here that can help guide us," even though I'm not sure that was really what I did, but maybe that was what they felt. Or it was kind of okay, this is the work you're doing. We don't fully understand it, but okay. So I think I got both.
Yeah. Was it a clear choice in terms of being a coach and a guide, as opposed to being, for example, a nurse or a doctor or a researcher?
Yeah, when I was younger, I really wanted to be a medical doctor, but I wanted to be a pediatrician. So, I don't, until I got into college and was doing organic chemistry, it was like, no, I can't do this. So I quickly jumped into psychology. I switched my major to psych and kind of had some sense of like social work type of thing, and have done that over my career, but not in a formal way with kind of a social work degree. In some ways I've steered away from kind of the conventional MD or social worker, and, coaching was very appealing because in some ways, it didn't trap me into like therapist, where there's certain requirements and things. I mean, certainly coaching is definitely a reputable, ethical, there's all those pieces and components, just not a fly-by-night type of thing. But I think for me that felt the right fit in terms of conventional versus a little bit more complementary types of things.
Has it changed in terms of your specialization, you know, I think of, okay, so your end of life coaching. When I think of the people that I've lost in my life in terms of their living phase of life, I think of all the different ways that I've coped with their leaving. So a coach, in helping me with that process, there's lots of juncture points. There's the practical, there's the grief, there's all that. Has your practice changed at any point, or were you always clear that you wanted to do a specific type of end of life?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's a really interesting question, because I've really vacillated between kind of grief and loss after the death of a loved one, and kind of the more end of life, what does that look like as we're approaching? And of course, grief is clearly a part of that. And found that my passion really is supporting the end of life piece. And wherever that might be on the spectrum, you know, someone with a new diagnosis to someone that's a little bit kind of closer to the end. And companioning is a word that has been coming up a lot for me that I really, really like, is really companioning someone through that process. And so there's different pieces depending on how someone comes to me in terms of a new diagnosis, and they're saying, you know what, I need to get things in order. So we kind of take that path and we do more advanced planning work and values and what's important and priorities and preferences, and kind of then we move to the practical forms and things. Others are along the path where maybe they've done that. And so it's either revisiting that just to make sure, or it may be now, okay, we've moved into someone is really kind of clearly a little closer to the end of their life than the beginning. So we kind of just, that becomes more companioning. And what are the needs that they have? Physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social. And so it really kind of depends where someone is in that juncture when I kind of connect with them, kind of what we do. But in answer to your question, it's more that, yes, kind of this end of life continuum is really where my passion is, and supporting someone through that. And even, you know, I've been a hospice volunteer for a number of years. So even being with someone that's actively dying, you know, we call that in hospice an 11th hour volunteer, you know, where you're actually literally being just, and it's being with them. There's nothing to do at that point. You are just being with them and companioning them as they're going through their journey.
Yeah, that's a real powerful position. Do you work with the families of someone who is on their last stage of life as well?
I have, yeah, absolutely. Because at that point, working with the individual directly isn't really, you know, conducive. So yeah, the family, and just helping to support them with kind of what's going on, what are their needs, connecting them to resources, just being present with them, you know, supporting them to be like, yes, kind of what's naturally happening to your is kind of the process. You know, I like to say, because I was never taught this or even told this, that, you know, death is an active, it's a real active thing. You know, it actually takes work to die and to let ourselves out of this physical body. And so, you know, sometimes people just really need that reassurance too, that things that are happening naturally, physically to their bodies, to their loved one's body, is the kind of natural process. And, you know, and the body knows what it needs to do. You know, we know. And again, I think those are conversations that generally, like, we're not engaged in or told about. Like, you know, we think something has to be done, or we have to do something to make something happen. And in some ways, it's, our bodies are like the natural world, like the trees, you know, that I spoke about. Like, the leaves know when to fall off. It doesn't need someone there to pluck it off for them. Or, you know, so I think it's a couple of things. I think it's that, and it's also helping people to see that dying is, you know, I don't want to say a difficult thing, but it is an active process. You know, someone just, unless you have a heart attack or a stroke and quickly, but if someone is kind of moving through the trajectory of either an illness or something like that, that's kind of the natural progression, that toward the end, the body really needs to, it's an active process.
I agree. And I think, I mean, just from a personal perspective, I think that lesson is really valuable to communicate, because there's a fear around dying often, I believe. And if that message was communicated, I think information is power. If people understand, yes, the fear can dissipate. And seeing death without understanding it, it can be very terrifying.
Absolutely.
Adding
Absolutely.
understanding helps. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that, Kim. That would be, is that education piece something that you have any energy behind getting more of a message out?
You know, yes, absolutely. And well, a couple of things are swelling from what you said, just the power of information and people really being able to see, because you bring up a huge thing that's such an elephant in the room, is the fear of dying. And for many, many reasons. The family members that are watching it, the individual going through it, you know, no one has come back from the other side, you know, if they're the veil or whatever, where you want to, and say, hey guys, it's really great over here, you know, just come on over. We've had the people who have near-death experiences, or, you know, those types of things that come back and say things are beautiful. But in some ways, nobody has come back affirmatively and said, you know, plant the stake in the ground that yes, it's wonderful. We believe that, or most people do. So there is that fear of what happens to me, what happens to my legacy, am I going to be forgotten? You know, all that from the family or from the individual, and then the family of the loss, you know, that person's physically not going to be there and all of the pieces. So that fear is the elephant in the room that a lot of times we see being acted out with bickering amongst family members or against the individual that is, you know, dying. Just all kinds of things that really underneath that is the fear, is real fear. So if we can dig under that, that's huge. So that was one piece that was coming up as you were talking. And the other, yes, the education, I think, is huge. Having conversations just about death and dying. You know, I had a podcast series or video series, which I've taken a little bit of a break from, but, you know, I'm going to be starting that up again soon, where I just bring on a subject matter expert, you know, another subject matter expert in death and dying, just so we can have a conversation. And it was similar to this, you know, where people could watch and they could type in questions and comments, and it became a real source of information for people, as well as just an opportunity for people to kind of, I don't like to use this word, but like lurk, you know, they could just be like, oh, well, I can just go and listen to this. I don't need to engage if I don't want. I don't need to type in a question or comment in the chat, but I can just listen to it. And again, information is power. And so I really tried to bring on someone around a various topic, whether it would be a medical doctor talking kind of about, you know, death and dying, or an organization or a hospice organization to talk about what is hospice and to get rid of some of the myths about what hospice is. I had a speaker on about home funerals and taking back kind of the way things used to be with caring for our own after death at home. You know, just things that people, green burials, things that people were like, wow, I never heard of that, or I didn't know that was legal, or I didn't even know that was an option. So yes, education absolutely is huge for me, huge passion.
We'll make sure on the on this video, to link to your video series. So,
okay, great.
So the old ones can still be viewed, and when you have the new ones, they'll be automatically added, because
Perfect.
That's really important. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, they're all on my website, so it's great.
Wonderful.
Great.
So, and you write articles as well, don't you, about these topics?
I do. Yes, I've started. My blog is a little bit behind, but I have been kind of writing some articles, and yeah, just trying to get the information out there in the mediums that, whether it's written, whether it's video, so that people can have these dialogues. And that's actually the name of my video series is, you know, dialogues on living and dying well. You know, it just, because to me, it feels like it's a conversation, it's a dialogue. It's, you know, let's explore this together.
I wonder how many people have thought of the concept of dying well. You know, you said living and dying well. And I wonder how many people have even thought of that as a possibility.
Dying well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's another big piece, because I think so many times we think that, or I should say, we don't realize that we're continuing to live until we take our last breath. And so, you know, now we've moved into, as I like to call it, the last chapter, right, of our life. And so there may be there's a dying component there, but we're also still living through that. So what does then that look like? And a lot of times people will throw up their arms. It's almost like kind of death and dying has taken over. Okay, just let it happen to me.
Yes.
Okay, that's definitely a choice, but it's not the only choice. You know, where people can say, okay, now this has really caused me to say, I want to take care of this, or I want to have this conversation, now it's important that every day isn't, you know, I wake up with gratitude, or, you know, whatever it might be. But yeah, dying well is definitely something that I think we're talking more and more about, that while we're dying, we're still living. And what does that then look like?
And I believe that we still have options until our last breath. And those options include making conscious intentions and commitments until our very last breath. So no moment is necessarily wasted. You know.
Exactly. It's such a beautiful way you put that. Yeah. Conscious intention, because I believe that. Yeah. And helping people, I should say, giving people that permission sometimes is a huge piece, you know, just like, oh, okay, you've now given me permission for that. Yeah.
Oh, and as a guide, in your role as a guide, what a lovely gift. I mean, to sit by somebody's side and aid them with that, giving them that permission. I mean, what a lovely, lovely gift.
Thank you. Yeah, you can see the kind of the weight in some ways that off their shoulders that maybe they didn't even realize they were carrying.
I bet. Yeah.
When they have that permission to just be like, oh, okay. And then from there, we can create that conscious intention, you know, those conscious actions of what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one thing that occurs to me is, you know, with coaching, often the practice is around online. How can you bring your business online and that sort of thing? And it doesn't seem to me that this would be the type of practice you would have online. It would be a real life practice where you're there present. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely the ideal. And, you know, that's kind of been an interesting piece, is being able to kind of connect with the local community, local referral sources, hospitals, hospices, physicians, word of mouth. Yes. And especially if someone is a little bit more, you know, closer to, you know, more in the dying process. To make some plans. So then we can do it via this way.
Now, Kim, you recently moved, didn't you? Last year?
I did, yeah. Recently, yeah, just coming up on a year. And so that's been the challenge, to connect with the local community.
How did you manage? I mean, obviously it's like any move, you just do it, but how did it impact your business? What kind of changes, and where did you move and that sort of thing? Tell me about the move.
Sure, yeah. So, you know, I moved from Boston, which is kind of the hub of kind of medical stuff, to Baltimore, Maryland, here in the States. And while there's a number of hospitals around here, the medical system is quite different than what I was used to in terms of free flowing. Free flowing is the wrong word, but kind of an openness to other types of things. It seems like things are kind of siloed here. And even connecting with like the hospice organization, kind of the umbrella here in the state of Maryland, um, learning that each individual hospice that's in the state is neighborhood specific or geographically specific. So I'm used to, in Massachusetts, there were maybe 40 or 50 hospices, but there was some connection and some ability to kind of cross over. And whereas here, each one kind of functions on their own within their geographical. So in some ways, it's almost more like a competitive piece versus what I've come to, which was more collaborative. So I found that very interesting and a little difficult to kind of break into, because you're resigned to the hospice within your community. And what if you don't have a connection with that? So I just said, okay. But what I did find was what's called a threshold support circle, which is an end-of-life small group, which I'm now happy to say I'm on the advisory board for, to really talk about presenting educational programs, workshops, film series. We're going to be having a Dying to Talk cafe opportunity. So it's a little play on words there. Similar to like a death cafe, which started over in Europe a few years ago. But we were finding that, again, maybe this is me not kind of fitting into the traditional piece, that there are some basic kind of requirements around that, which I totally understand. But we want to add an educational piece. And if you have a death cafe, you can't bring in a speaker, you can't bring in a film or a book. It's just more of and that's a fantastic model, and there's plenty of those around. So we just have a play on words, and it opens up for us an opportunity to have more, and also if there are needs of the community that people are saying, I'd love for this, or I'd love for that, we have the opportunity to do that. So in June, next month, we're going to be hosting our first Dying to Talk Cafe here in Baltimore. So again, in person, people can come and just dialogue, and we'll have some pastries and tea and whatever. Those types of things are really, really powerful in terms of the education and getting the word out for people. I think that's really vitally important. So those have been a couple of ways I found in the move to connect.
Yeah.
The community.
It's interesting because the theme of education seems really dominant in the move.
Yeah.
So your video series might not be where you may have planned to have it. Maybe you didn't have the time to get the latest speakers lined up, but it may have been because you were doing the live advisory work, or for whatever reasons. But education seems to be a really dominant theme. Is that?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that
definitely,
I don't know if this is accurate, but it seems also that, my experience with wakes and funerals is that there's such an intimacy with people, and there's always coming together of food. And when you said the death cafes, you're going to have tea and pastries, I immediately had that sense of community, and you're coming together with, tea and pastries, and there's that sense of community. Was that intentional, or am I just putting that together?
No, that's really an intentional piece, and because I think exactly what you're talking about. There's usually food around that, and food in general, I think, lowers kind of the resistance a little bit, or lowers a sense, if we're eating and communing together. And because this can be for some people, a really heavy topic. So being able to kind of, at least initially, begin to kind of form that sense of community and safety, and food tends to kind of create that environment. Yeah. So you're right. You're absolutely right.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch topics, and I'm going to talk about how you and I first met.
Okay.
And I'm so thrilled that we did, because you've enhanced my life tremendously. And we met through a program, but through Alan Seal, the Transformational Presence Leadership and Coach Training Program. And you are very instrumental in that program. You're the facilitator of the entire program. Is that your official role? You're the Chief Action Officer, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my official title. Yes. Kind of the chief get it all done person, since, for 4.5 years, it had just been Alan and I kind of running the program. So basically, yeah, a lot of the program stuff and administrative piece and making sure all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Kim, I think of you as a transformational presence, and I find that your work with end of life really fits into that whole concept. Because when I think of transformational presence as an overall concept and end of life, life transforms as we go from one chapter to another. And I consider dying a chapter into a new one. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's another chapter into the unknown. Right. What an adventure.
Yes.
And so you stayed really committed to whatever you set to do. How did you first know that you wanted to be involved with the tremendous program? I believe in it strongly too.
Transformational Presence community.
Yeah.
There, in addition, kind of my interest in kind of death and dying and kind of knowing that something's bigger than me, there's been always this kind of spiritual and energy component that, I've tapped into. So I've taken like a couple of levels of Reiki energy. I went to a massage therapy program to do kind of hands-on work and the spiritual piece around that. I wasn't so much into like medical massage, and of course I had to learn all the muscles and all that of the body, but it was more the spiritual energy component around that. I've done some shamanic work, traveled to Peru and studied with the shamans. And so there's a spiritual energy component. And when I first heard about Alan Seal and the transformational presence work, I thought, wow. And even to back that up one step, the coach training program I went to had a very strong energy component. And an additional piece to the coach training was an energy leadership assessment index, that program that I've taken and become certified in. So looking at people's energy throughout the day based on 7 levels that were created, of course, in conjunction with the 7 chakras and a lot of the other kind of spiritual pieces out there. So that then kind of naturally led, when I found Alan Seal through another life coach, and said, whoa, this really resonates with me, the whole energy piece and how are you showing up and all that, I think just gelled together for me. And I said, I need to learn more about this. And did.
Yeah. And when you talk about your coach training and all, and your shamanic work and your energy work, you talk about it as being separate from your end of life coaching. Do you ever connect the two?
That's not intentionally, but sometimes that they're there in terms of, specifically I can, not intentionally, and at the same time I'm beginning to become more intentional about doing that. I had a beautiful experience with a gentleman that I worked with in hospice in Massachusetts, and he lived probably 8 months longer than the doctors had predicted. So again, it tells you right there that, when it's his time. And so I would bring my massage table, and once a week I would go to his house, and one of his daughters moved in with him. And so I would give him a 30-minute massage in his hospital bed. And then I would give his daughter a 30-minute massage in the same room, because usually I'd do him first, so he'd be dozing off on the massage table. And became very close with them, doing this for almost a year. And I immediately was informed when he died by the hospice organization. And one of the policies was that as a volunteer, you really didn't unless you were invited, you really didn't kind of go to the service or to the house or anything like that. And yet there was a strong intuitive piece that said to me, just get in the car and go to the house. And I didn't call and get permission. I didn't do anything. I just figured, well, what do they say? Just do it and ask for forgiveness later.
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to get in trouble, I was going to get in trouble, but I felt a strong pull. And when I got there, the daughter opened the door, and she couldn't have been happier to see me. And she was with the nurse counting medications and all those logistical things you need to do. And she said, Dad is in there. And so I said, might I have your permission to do some energy work on Dad? And she said, you can do whatever you want. And so I went in, and he had passed maybe 30 minutes before, 45 minutes by this point. And I did some shamanic work, shamanic death and dying work, and just really cleared his energy and just made sure that he literally was fully out of his body. And it was as powerful for his body there and whatever parts of him were still there as it was for me. And I just thought, wow, I need to incorporate this on a more intentional level. All this energy piece. Reiki. I used to do Reiki, and I do Reiki all the time with people as well, ask their permission. And nobody's ever said no, once they get a sense and feel the energy and just feel calm or whatever. So yeah, thank you for bringing that back up about the intentionality of bringing those pieces together, because I've done them all separately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I think so many of us that are committed to doing work with people, we have a really deep spiritual side, and we have all these personal things we've explored, myself included. But we keep them, in a place that is, for whatever reason, we've thought of them as our own development, or we've explored them for various reasons, and I believe we've done that for really pure intentions. And I also think that we, myself included, there's a point in time when it is very beneficial to tie them together. And I'm learning how and when to do that also. So I'm curious because to me, it's always easier to see someone else's tie-ins than it is our own. So to me, I could see where it would be very powerful in your work, that the two would go together.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my dreams is to create what they call social model hospice home, where it's not bound by the state or federal regulations, and it's volunteer. Well, there's a kind of an executive director or a director of it, but it's really community supported and volunteer run, and individuals, that have been certified as hospice eligible, meaning they have 6 months or less to live technically by a doctor, would be eligible to come, and they would bring if they wanted, their own hospice team. So they own their own medical people, but that this hospice home would have massage therapy, would have energy workers, would have kind of that whole holistic complementary piece to the whatever medical piece that they bring themselves. So I can see all that in some ways under one roof, in the form of a hospice home in the community. So that is my dream, is to have that and not be bound by the Medicare, regulations that tend to then get the focus away from patient care to more reports and regulatory things. And of course, there's all kinds of other things Department of Health needs to, we're just not talking about, opening up some house that's vacant on the street. There are some requirements and some oversights and all those things, but you're not bound by some of the more stringent Medicare, because it's financially driven, regulations. And this involves the community.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think it's entirely doable. It's like um, medicine has evolved in some models, integrative and functional medicine. They follow the legal tenets, and when appropriate, they use the traditional Western medicine. But when the body and systems, the physical systems need it, they've drawn any discipline, and the practitioner knows which to draw from because they use more of a team approach. And, I think it's brilliant, but they're not breaking any sort of medical code or legal code. They're following all of that. So I think our future is pretty bright. We're just maybe not young enough to see it. I don't know. Right. That was just an offhand. Right. I don't know.
No, I think and to me it also goes to kind of, and Alan Seale talks about this a lot, kind of the cathedral building, right? Planting those seeds and starting something that we may not see the fruits of. Correct. But yet putting it in place so that someone else picks up on it, or moves it forward. And that's exciting to me too.
Yeah. And with your education, you're doing that very clearly.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely a passion. I think at some point, we've had conversations about a passion, and as I'm even hearing myself, I that was kind of there, but it's really crystal clear now from our conversation now. This kind of education is definitely a passion of mine. Yes.
Well, and as you're saying it, it's going to become like a regular post for me. So you're not going to be able to forget it now.
Okay. Great. I love it.
Who are some of the people and things and events and such that influence you?
It's a really, really good question. Immediately what pops into my mind is, it's not a specific person, but it's the people that I've worked with over the years. As I alluded to earlier, kind of some of the social work types of things. I used to work with special needs children, and some were verbal, but most were nonverbal. And those were the kids, that really influenced me because of just being who they are, because they had no way to be someone else. They were just who they are. I worked for a while doing case management with homeless families, and just watching them navigate, the system. And, you're in a shelter with small children. You don't have anything that's your own except for maybe a bag or two that you brought from wherever you came from, whatever the circumstance was. And so, those folks just really influenced and really made a mark on me about just showing up, even when life gets hard, just show up. So, and people that are out there just kind of putting one foot in front of the other and that are moving forward. People that, are starting these social model hospices. There's not a lot out there to follow, but they're pioneers in some ways. And so I feel like some ways that's me too, in certain ways. I mean, there are other life coaches, there are other people working in end of life and death and dying. And yet, in some ways, kind of the angle I've taken is a pioneer. So I guess it's those people that I see that either continue to just show up, whatever that means for them, and those that are just really pioneering and putting one foot in front of the other. That's really people who influence me.
It's beautiful. What do you do to relax? How do you have fun?
How do I have fun? I love being outdoors. My top preference is to be at the beach and be with the waves and the ocean. And if that's not possible, second choice is to be in the mountains, in the woods. Just really kind of just breathe in nature. Just breathe in the air. So those are the top two pieces. I love to read. I just love to be by myself and just connect with whatever is happening, you know, whether it's reading, whether it's writing. Just, I enjoy my own company.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So does everybody else. They enjoy your company.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
What's your favorite word?
My favorite word. I would have to say my favorite word is independence. Independence. You know, that's actually one of my values is independence. And two others that I just want to share is connection and honesty. And so in some ways, you know, as I say independence, it's almost, and I think of connection as also being another value and go, whoa, are they kind of at opposite ends? Which actually then switches the word for me to interdependent. Because it's a both and for me. You know, it's really it's me and I know who I am, and yet I can be in relationship with and connection with others. And it's not surface. You know, I had this conversation this morning with a friend, and you know, it's surface conversations exhaust me. But when there's some depth and meaning, I get so energized and charged up. Mm-hmm. And that was something I hadn't realized until we were having that conversation this morning. And I went, whoa, that's it. So the interdependence, I think, is one of my favorite words.
Do you find if people aren't giving you that deep, especially perhaps when you move to a new community, you don't have the resources that you may have had when you were living in Boston, where you'd lived for a long time? I mean, we build up communities over time. In a new community, I'm going to make the assumption you didn't walk into a ready-made network of connection. Right. Were you able to?
Right.
Were you able to find some of that depth in your reading?
Yes. You know, I was. I mean, it took the word sleuth is coming to me as words. You know, it took some kind of trial and error, kind of taking that step. Oh, doesn't seem to be the path. Okay. But not giving up on that. Again, back to that kind of, okay, so let's try this. So also not being attached to the outcome, mm-hmm. You know, or I should say not attached to the outcome, not attached to the way I think it will look, that the outcome will look. That's a better way of saying it. Yeah. So yeah, kind of and then landing on, you know, something or someone and going, oh, okay. And then having that, and then it grew a little bit. So yeah, but definitely you're absolutely right on. You know, I didn't step into a ready-made network. So it did take the opportunity to step out there, which also, you know, kind of that independence, interdependence kind of connection. It's like, as I said earlier, kind of enjoying being by myself. It took a little bit of effort to say, okay, I need to. No one's going to come knocking on the door and say, hi, Kim, you know, welcome to the neighborhood here. What do you do? Blah, blah. It took me to step out. It took me to be a pioneer to say, okay, hi, here I am. This is what is of importance to me. So, and I'm still finding that, you know, even a year later, I'm still needing to take those steps. And then trusting that doors are opening and doors will continue to open.
As a pioneer, in a year, what doors would you like to see have already opened? What would you like to see in a year? What will it look like?
A year from now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, I think that there's more in-person events that are happening here in my local community, whatever and wherever they might be. Definitely more educational in-person things is a huge piece for me. Yeah, it would be really wonderful. And from that, then I think is potential clients that could utilize my ability to companion them. So it's I think that that's the main vehicle for me, is the education and community events and opportunities for conversations, which then can lead to other speaking opportunities, an entrance in the door of some of the local hospitals here, an entrance into some of the hospices for educational opportunities, and working directly with clients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's exciting.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Mhm.
Is there anything you'd like to add that I didn't ask you?
Well, this seemed pretty comprehensive. Thank you so much for this opportunity to kind of share a passion of mine of let's continue to facilitate these dialogues, and let's take fear off the table and take a look at what's underneath that. Because, as I share with everyone, that we can push death and dying aside, we can push it down, we can bury it, and it's gonna come to all of us. And so I encourage people to be proactive about what that looks like, and proactive in terms of living fully now and not waiting, and, starting to, how many times do we hear, Jan, when I retire, I will, when my kids go off to college, I will. And so helping people to say, how can you begin to do some of that now? Because when you retire isn't promised. I have many, many stories of people, they retire, and within anywhere from 3 days after retirement to, a year or two out, and person is ill, the person dies. And so being able to say, you know what, let's back that up and let's begin that now. How are you living fully now? Because that's the piece. So thank you for this opportunity to kind of share that and encourage people to just begin to look, just crack the door, and just begin to say, oh, okay, let me take a look at that. That's what I encourage. We don't need to jump across the Grand Canyon. We need to just crack the door and let the light in a little bit and begin the conversations. And that's what I found too. I just want to share this last point, that people begin to talk about this. There is a lightness, as you said at the beginning of our call, like, we're talking about something that's real. We're talking about something that carries a lot of emotion. And at the same time, we can have lightness with it. Mm-hmm. And people find that when they have conversations and just even acknowledge, wow, yeah, I'm going to die at some point. I don't know when, but what might that look like? What do I want? Then all of a sudden there's some of that release of that heaviness, because now we're not putting so much energy to push it away or keep it down. That takes a lot of energy that I think people don't even realize that they're exerting. And when we could just say, okay. And the old adage of talking about it isn't going to make it happen, that I used to hear all the time. If I talk about that, I'm going to bring it on. Wow, you're a really powerful person then, if you can talk about that and all of a sudden, and I share that. I say, wow, you really have superpowers. Yeah. And then they laugh and they realize how kind of silly that sounds. But some of that we're told too. Don't talk about it because you'll bring it on, you'll encourage it. Well, that's a myth, I think.
Well, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. It's, yes, we need to talk positively and bring on, but we can bring on a good attitude. Yeah. We can change our perspective. And perspective is something that is within our control. And
yes,
perspective is something we can change about the way we think about the last chapter of our life, which is dying. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm all for bringing a little joy.
Way to sum that up. Yeah, I would say that's a beautiful way to sum it up. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm delighted that we had this conversation. I'm excited to have everybody listen to your message and get in touch with you directly. And I'll have the links to you on the show, but tell everybody how they could reach you.
Great, thank you. Probably the easiest way is my website is www.yourendoflifeguide.com. So an email to Kim@yourendoflifeguide.com, and be happy to reply and support and answer questions. Yeah, thank you, Jan.
Perfect. My pleasure.